Hey guys, I'm Ethan, a New York-based organization development coach, and I want to say something right out of the gate. So on my YouTube channel, there's approximately 370 videos, and I'm really excited to share with you that of all those videos, this video, how do you actually measure your organization's culture? That is, to my way of thinking, the most important video that I've ever done. So without further ado, let's just dive right into how do you measure your organization's culture? So let me start out by saying it's not an easy endeavor, which is why nearly all organizations, whenever I coach them, they'll say, we tried it, we couldn't get very far, or we never progressed because we didn't know how to undertake this key initiative. Well, measuring your organization's culture is akin to saying, what is the market value of our organization predicated on a reputational brand based on the totality of everything we've done, and especially considering our people investment strategy? What is the value of our organization's culture? It's a critical initiative to do, certainly at any stage of the organization's life cycle, but also when you get to points in your organization's history where you're thinking about merger and acquisition, where you're thinking about joining another organization and you want to know what your business valuation is, you start with your culture. So let me walk you through some of the steps that are required in no particular order, but understanding that this is a complicated, complex initiative, but the value gained in terms of the insights that you gain when you go through this process, they're immeasurable. It is one of the single most valuable initiatives that you can undertake. And as we approach the end of 2024, it's an exceptional way to kick off your strategic planning for 2025. So let's start with market conditions. One of the easiest ways to start to get a size, a handle on your value of your culture is go to your customers and ask them, do a net promoter score survey where you say on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 is not at all, 10 is completely comfortable. How likely are you to refer other people to our organization? 1 to 6 is negative, 7 and 8, neutral, you're Sweden. 9 and 10 is a relatively high score that you can start to figure out how to monetize this, okay? But that's just one factor. It's a very, very complex mathematical formula called organizational culture value. So that's the first, is NPS, Net Promoter Score. Second, your customer lifetime value. And so if you're wondering what that is, it's exactly what it is. It's from the moment that customer joined you, they signed their contract, all the way through the effective end date of your service agreement with them. What was the totality of the value in terms of dollars? One way to think of CLV, customer lifetime value, is RFVP, RIF-VIP. So recency, when was the last time they bought from you? F, frequency, how often do they buy from you? V is volume per transaction. What's the size of an average order? And the P in the RFVP is profit. When you think about the client and you think about the staff hours required to service them and the revenue that comes in, you do a profit margin assessment on the client to come up with the value. So 2 elements of your culture score or your culture value is your net promoter score. How likely are your clients to refer other people to you? And your customer lifetime value. What's the totality of the value over time of your average client engagement? Next up, think about your employees. One of the first things I did when I went out on my own 15 years ago as a business growth coach was to institutionalize for my clients an idea generation program. It's a greenhouse funding initiative. So do you have a formal program in place where you fund on an annual basis, soliciting ideas from your employees? Your employees will therefore be empowered to give you ideas on one of 2 financial performance measures. Revenue generation. What revenue is associated with the ideas that the client contributed, the employee contributed as far as new product development, new services, new feature functionality. So 1 is a revenue lever. those ideas submitted by employees that generate revenue. The second is cost reduction. That's equally valuable, right, to your organization, is the dollar value associated with some kind of idea that an employee contributes to reduce cost in terms of automation, becoming more efficient, cutting out wasted steps or processes or procedures, delegation, outsourcing, omitting, all of those cost reduction ideas that an employee contributes, you measure that. So at the end of a calendar year, what was the aggregate revenue generated by your workforce in terms of new product, new service initiatives, or new client acquisition initiatives? So those are revenue generation, or cost containment revenue savings. Either way, revenue or cost containment, that's monetary gain or bonus from your value of your employees. All right. The next step is quality of hire. So I want to walk you through something. I'm going to walk you down to quality of hire. When you bring new people into your organization, how do you measure the efficacy or the success of your talent acquisition initiatives? And the way to do that is to measure in every calendar year, you're looking at the people who were brought on board in that calendar year. I don't care if they're 30,000 or 3. So how do you look at quality of hire? You look at them through 3 key metrics: performance, productivity, and retention. Let's do retention first. In a calendar year, for all the people you brought on board in that year, what % of those new hires were with you at the end of the year? That's one measure of quality of hire, which goes to measuring or valuing your culture. The second measure is performance. You take the average of all of those people hired in the year, you look at their performance review their ratings. So if you have 10 employees, the average was an 85% in their performance across their KPIs for all 10 of them collectively, those employees hired in that calendar year. If that 85% performance rate is consistently applied, that's a second measure of quality of hire. So retention is a % who stay with you at the end of the year. Performance is an aggregate achievement of KPIs, goals completed. And the third is productivity. And so you look at their KPIs and you look at what are the measurable outputs. Most organizations struggle here because they have goals that aren't able to be measured for achievement. They're not numeric. So one of the things I'm certified in is what's called 6 boxes, which is a employee productivity work output measuring coaching schema. We do that. So you factor all these in: retention, performance, and productivity. You take those 3 scores, you average them, and congratulations, that is a measurable metric called the quality of your hiring. Okay, next up, your brand name recognition. This is a marketing tool. So you go to your marketing department and you say, I want a Q score for our company. So if you don't know what a Q score is a monetary value associated with your organization's reputational brand. So you look at Gore, DuPont, Marriott, Disney, Chobani, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, Wegmans, Nucor Steel, all of the great places to work, they all have high reputational Q scores. They have established reputational brands. There's a monetary value to that. So that's something that you want to take into this algorithm where you're feeding data, measurable data, into what the value of your organization's culture is. Next up, market share and competitive analysis. So what % of the market do you own? What are your short-term, short meaning 3 to 6 months, and longer term, 6+ months to maybe 12 or 18 months? What are those short and long-term initiatives that may factor into increase or decrease in your market share? And then competitive analysis. Again, go to your marketing department, talk to your research people. What is your market share currently? And what are your short and longer term prospects in terms of new products being offered, new services, bundling packages, in terms of upselling new services or products to existing clients, your client attrition rate on a calendar year basis, what percent of your clients renew or don't renew. You look at your Pareto principle, the top 20% of your Rolodex in terms of 80% of your revenue. What kind of retention rate do you have of your most successful clients? All of that data gets aggregated into that culture score. Next up, there are organizations like Irrational Capital who have spent decades assessing and developing human capital measures of culture. In fact, Irrational Capital offers 3 publicly available funds, large cap, mid cap, small cap, of companies whose stocks are publicly traded, but who have amazing reputations for a great place to work. You monetize that, you measure it. The next thing I want to talk about as you're thinking about culture is your people. And when we talk about people, we talk about what is the return on your employee investment. This is going to be a really critical conversation. So I want you to kind of take a deep breath and think about, from an employee perspective, your people strategy. How do you consider people? What is your relationship with your employees? And how do you think of your employees? What do I mean by that? There's 2 mindsets that are prevalent in organizations. One is an employee is an asset, and that's negative. That's 20th century. That is a horrible way to think about your employees. Or stated in other ways, our people are payroll, headcount, our largest expense. When you think about employees as an expense, you're not thinking about how to leverage them. You're not thinking how to monetize, and you're not thinking how to maximize performance, productivity, and profitability. So let's get to the heart of your culture value in terms of what's the value of your people's contribution. Employees are not assets. They're not photocopiers with limbs. Your people are your only lasting competitive advantage. If you have a great strategy, but very unmotivated employees, your strategy can't be implemented. Everybody has operational efficiency. It's not a unique value proposition. It's not a differentiator. It's a base level of expectation. We assume your small to mid-sized firm or your large organization or your startup even, you all have access to the same technology, the same operational efficiency tools. EOS integrators, aggregators, supply chain, platforms, dashboards, AI, ChatGPT, you got all the same technology. So operations and strategy are not your great competitive differentiator. It's your people. So I want to walk you through how you measure the contribution, the profit of each employee. Start out with somebody's salary, multiply that by 1.2 to 1.4, or take your whole workforce, the cost of employees, your payroll, and multiply that by 1.2 to 1.4 as a base factor. So that's the salary and other things that you're paying for. Things like bonuses, cost of living adjustments, benefits, certifications. That total spend on your payroll, your total revenue spent, or your payment to your people, multiplied by a factor of, let's say, 1.2, that's the cost of your employees. That's the cost side. Now, how do you measure the revenue side? Well, the cheat sheet or easy way is take your total firm revenue, divide by number of employees, and that's average revenue per employee. But that doesn't really factor all employees equally, right? Most of the revenue that comes from your workforce is your revenue generating roles, your rainmakers, your salespeople. But how do you measure the employee ROI of people like back office support or customer care or operations? How do you measure their revenue contribution? Well, it's tricky, but it's possible. So you take a look at all of your employees, and then you implement a standard universal way that you measure employee ROI. The first thing is you look at their goals for the year, the quarter in the year, their KPIs. You look at what percent of performance was achieved. You look at re-architecting any single KPI for any employee that can't be measured in terms of numeric positive impact. you re-architect every KPI. So now, what's the revenue of employee contribution? Let's say an employee you pay $100,000 a year, and they achieve 85% of their cumulative KPIs. Their revenue contribution is what you paid them multiplied by their productivity percentage. So they're really worth not the 100,000, they're worth the 85,000. But that's past performance. You're looking backwards from that prior year. That's one starting point, is percent of KPI. What are the other ways? I've already talked to you about quality of hire, and you come up with an average for those three measures of retention percentage rate, productivity, and the achievement of their performance. And that's the way to start measuring. Next up, every employee that you pay, you're basically wasting 75 cents on every dollar. What do I mean? That payroll number, what you're spending for your whole workforce, you're basically wasting conservatively 50 to 75% of it. Why? Why would I dare say that? And how do you start to measure the amount you're paying that you're not getting a return on your investment versus rethinking your people in terms of investing in them? When you hire somebody to do a job, you're paying for 5 to 8 core roles and responsibilities, right? It's the job description. But 3 months, 6 months, a year into their work for your organization, that candidate who brought a bunch of unique value proposition, a bunch of background, skills, experience that weren't being leveraged, you were basically wasting money by not taking advantage of that. So as your needs change, that job description you hired that individual for, you're really not getting a return on what you were paying for. How do you rethink, re-architect that individual employee's contributions so you can start to maximize your investment in her or him or them? It's not easy, but it's critically important. Here's what you do. You say that individual was performing those 5, 6, 7 roles, responsibilities. Let me go back to her or him and talk to them about what are the things that they brought to the table that we weren't leveraging. Cultural diversity, language proficiency, certifications, training, volunteer work, research they conducted, their network of relationships, both personally and professionally, their sphere of influence, their ability to positively impact other people in your organization through coaching, mentoring programs. Maybe they contributed ideas in an idea generation program that generated more revenue or reduced costs that led to positive impact. Those are all literally mathematical data elements that you aggregate into for each employee an ROI. And you're basically matching their contributions. You look at the tasks in their role, you look at what jobs they owned and they contributed to. And so what they were responsible for in their job has changed over time. And now you're going back and you're revisiting their workflow. So when you do this for your whole workforce, it's called the human capital audit. Next step in your culture is you do what's called, and I've developed a proprietary 18-question survey, but there are other organizations that do workforce vitality surveys. You're doing a snapshot survey in a moment of time. You're asking people a series of questions around how do they feel? Is their voice being heard? Are their ideas being solicited? Are they feeling engaged? Are they challenged? You want to do a pulse survey of your people's aggregate feelings about that. So we've talked a little bit about employee ROI, conducting a human capital audit, doing a survey of your people's engagement, getting a Q score of your organization's, the value of your reputational brand, getting data around a measure of your culture. There are thousands of organizations whose culture has already been measured by organizations, as I said, like Irrational Capital, who have a human capital factor process where they certify a score. We talked about, from a client perspective, your net promoter score. We talked about client lifetime value. How do you look at the contributions of your employees in terms of their ideas generated to generate new revenue and or reduce costs? We talked about rethinking your employee, not just in terms of her or his or their ability to do work, a certain number of tasks associated with the job, but rather the totality of what they bring to the table that you could literally leverage if you re-architect your relationship. The last thing I'm going to talk to you about, we talked about market share, competitive analysis. The last thing I'm going to talk to you about is the holy grail, evaluation of your culture. To what extent, what degree does your workforce, your employees have ownership in your company? So we call it ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans. Have you considered giving your employees either outright ownership of the company or a portion of ownership? We know from decades of research into organizational development, we have decades of research to quantify and objectively measure the powerful impact of what happens when you have an amazing culture. So one way to think about it is the only way to get your people to be truly engaged, empowered, incentivized, to have blood, sweat, and tears equity in the success of your organization is to give them ownership. So I, a while ago, had the son of the founder of a company in Southern California called Morningstar, not the ratings company, but the tomato company. I had Tim Roofer come on and talk about Morningstar. Great example in Southern California. 500 full-time employees, 1,500 seasonal workers. They've been in operation since the 1970s, so 50 years. They're a billion-dollar enterprise. No job descriptions, no hierarchical command control structure. Everybody that they bring in, seasonal or full-time, is empowered from day one to have complete decision-making and autonomy over their work. The manager is really just a coach, and the coach's responsibility is to make sure when that individual who's hired is working on team-based, collaborative, self-directed team projects, the coach, facilitates introductions with other people that individual is going to work with on a team. They have ownership. They haven't had a negative fiscal quarter in 50 years. Billion-dollar enterprise, 500 full-time employees. And that's the kind of power that happens when you give up control. See, most organizations, when we're talking about valuing your culture, they're still hesitant to give employees complete control. And what does that mean? It's the whole Daniel Pink metric or measure framework of 4 considerations for employee autonomy. Do you give your people complete autonomy to pick and choose where they work from, who they work with, when they do the work, and how they get the work done? And that's powerful. So I want to share with you one more consideration to talking about valuing your business. What is the research on how we monetarily measure the impact of amazing workplace culture? Well, we don't have to do it ourselves. The good part of that is organizations have already created that kind of research. So what does that mean? I'm going to go to an organization called Great Places to Work, and they're a respected authoritative body who researches the monetary impact of amazing culture. So I want to talk a little bit about this. Companies that are highly respected, they have a high degree of trust that they've established with their workforce. Those cultures are more profitable and yield higher stock returns. So according to research from FTSE Russell, companies that make the Fortune 100 best companies to work for, they outperform the financial market by a factor of 3.68. That's massive. That kind of factor differential is massive. So we know companies every year that make the Fortune 100 best companies to work for, Those companies that are highly respected, they have, relatively speaking, half of the employee turnover of their peers. That's another valuation in terms of culture. When your people leave, you're pretty much dependent on the work they were doing. So you have to backfill, you have to hire for their replacement. That takes time, that takes cost. So losing somebody has an adverse financial measurable impact. Okay? Great places to work, great cultures have a measurable impact on reducing burnout. Workplace stress costs the US economy $500 billion. Workers who do report that they're feeling a sense of burnout, they're 2.6 times as likely to seek out a different job. That's it. I'm done. I can't commit anymore. I'm leaving. 63% who experience burnout or indicate that they've experienced burnout, 63% are likely to take sick days and 23% more likely to visit the ER. While only 16% of workers at a typical US workplace consider themselves to be thriving, engaged, highly motivated, intrinsically motivated, according to Great Place to Work research, at the 100 best companies, 58% of employees say that they have a heightened sense of well-being. Also, research shows in Great Places to Work research, the highest levels of innovation occur when every employee is empowered to participate. And that gets back to what I was saying before when I referenced Daniel Pink. In closing, measuring the culture of your organization is not impossible. There are a number of organizations who are providing the key metrics, insights, data analysis to start to measure the monetary value of creating a great place to work. What are definitive authoritative bodies that exist to identify what it means to be a great place to work? Well, for starters, there's an organization called Ethisphere. Ethis, E-T-H-I-S, Sphere, S-P-H-E-R-E. They've been doing decades of work into assessing organizations with amazing cultures. I spent 10 years researching great places to work all over the world. My conclusion after a decade of research that went into my second book, The Compassionate Organization, is this. In over 200 countries and over 7,000 organizations that I looked into, there was only one characteristic that all amazing places to work, one characteristic they all shared. It had nothing to do with country of incorporation, leadership team, industry sector, product services. When I looked at the top financial performing, first or second place in terms of financial performance across 200 countries, and I looked at close to 7,000 organizations, there was one characteristic all successful, financially top-performing firms, one attribute they shared. It was an amazing, compassionate culture. So thanks for checking out the video. All the links that I mentioned to resources, references, things that I shared, they're in the description below. Please like the video, subscribe to my channel to support the work that I'm doing. And if you want to have a conversation around how do you measure the value of your culture, how do you identify your employee ROI, reach out to me, let me know. We can talk through in your organization how to implement a powerful strategy to put your people first and unleash their untapped potential. Thank you. Have a great day.